Good morning, guys. The guineas are out again this morning, and I've had to pull out the blue sweater again, which I didn't think I'd have to do this season, but here we are. So we went ahead and removed all of the broccoli that we got several harvests from, and in their place are some melons. So I put some Kajari melons in here and some melons called Charente melon, which is a lot like a cantaloupe. It's got a different skin on it. They're super, super fragrant, really delicious. I think down here though, these are Kajaris. I'm gonna have to do some thinning, which is perfectly fine. Yep, the other variety is barely starting to come up too. See that? Exciting. I am definitely out of trellis space over here, so these melons are not going to be trellised. They're going to be allowed to ramble in the bed and also cascade over. It's going to be pretty. Many of these cabbages are doing quite well still. That one. I think I'm actually going to harvest this one. Look how big that is. I did see one little white butterfly or moth or what have you in our yard the other day, and I want to go ahead and harvest the cabbages as soon as I can, as soon as I feel like they're as big as they're going to get, or at least close to it, because those white butterflies could easily mean that the cabbage loopers are going to be on these things very soon. See, I cut this whole thing off, and I'm just going to be removing the outer leaves. Here we are. Here is our beautiful cabbage. This is our first green cabbage that we've actually grown. I have grown quite a few purple cabbages in the past, but this is a new one for us. I saw a couple tiny little slugs while I was removing those outer leaves, but this just looks perfect. No bug damage. You definitely don't have to discard these outer cabbage leaves. They're completely edible. In fact, they can be really good for doing things like holding down your ferments inside your fermentation jar, holding your food well in a steamer basket. I'm gonna go ahead and feed them to my chickens. My pigs get a lot of the food scraps from inside the house, and the chickens are definitely overdue for a treat. Good morning, sweet boy. How you doing? Good morning. So, I know that this bed is 2 feet high, but for size reference, this is how tall some of the tomatoes are getting. This one is the strawberry tomato, and it's got huge trusses on it and some fruit. See how big this is? This whole thing. From here, this is all going to be tomatoes. The Brad's Atomic Grape is still looking wonderful. I'm putting on more. And over here, I noticed that my favorite tomato from last year, the Belgian Giant, is starting to put on fruit. They have this lovely fluted texture. I can't wait for you guys to see them when they're mature. And this strawberry tomato is starting to get some color on it. And this is where I put some sweet potatoes. You can see they're starting to put up their greens. And the past couple years that I have done sweet potatoes, I have done so by planting slips. So when you have a sweet potato at home, you may have noticed that sometimes they'll put off shoots or greens. And those shoots and greens, by the time they get about yay big, a little bit of foliage on them, you can actually snap them off and root those and plant those in the ground and get sweet potatoes off of that. Last year though, I got the tip that if we planted just whole potatoes, we could wind up with more potatoes at the end instead of just starting from slips. So we tried that this year and we planted whole sweet potatoes. So there's about 1 potato every square foot in here, and then there's a few over here. Our chamomile really didn't love the weather that we had last night. I have harvested a lot of chamomile, but I definitely got behind on it, as you can see. I'm gonna see how well this chamomile will come out of this by the time the sun comes out and they can really adequately dry off. But I may end up pulling most of these plants anyways. This is actually our blackberry bed. These are thornless blackberries, and I want them to go ahead and take over. There is a little blackberry plant down here that has been a little bit shaded out, so it's not gonna break my heart if I have to remove the chamomile. Getting a few flowers on the blackberries. We actually planted these potatoes quite a while ago. It was well before our last frost date, so they've been in the ground a little while, and I'm noticing that they're starting to get a little bit yellow. This is quite normal of potato plants. Normally you don't harvest until the tops die off, and it looks like they're kind of starting that process. I did plant this potato bed with the intention of harvesting them as baby potatoes. I think they're called new potatoes when they're little. I haven't actually gotten in there to do that yet. Should we see what's in here? Let's see, let's pull up a plant. You guys. Look. So really similarly to what I did with the sweet potatoes, I just threw whole potatoes down in here. So this one plant did start out as one seed potato, and clearly we have increased the bounty. Look what we got out of it. So this is about the size of the potato that I was hoping for. It looks like I'll probably be harvesting pretty soon. I see some little nubbins here that probably will turn into potatoes as well. I don't know if this is gonna work, but I'm gonna shove this plant back in the ground and we'll see if these do anything. Look what I found in the hole. There's enough. Oh, there's more down here. Oh, I'm gonna have to really dig this bed out. We actually did better than I thought from this one plant. So far, we've harvested cabbage and potatoes today. Looks like we may be having a full-on Irish dinner. There's more than just red potatoes in there too. There's a purple variety. Guys, I forget everything that's in here, but now I'm super excited about it. The bed behind me here is also filled with brassicas. We have purple cauliflower. We had some broccoli, which I'm still able to harvest some little florets off of. And I have some purple cabbage as well. Let's see how those are heading up. You can feel when you pinch down in at the center if you're getting a nice hard head in there started. And we are, that's started. You can see this one a little bit better. I may go ahead and harvest this one too, even though it's not as purple as I've seen in years past. They are starting to bolt. These little flowers are separating and the plant is trying to go to seed. This particular variety of cauliflower is really forgiving. You can harvest it when the florets are pretty well separated and it doesn't taste bitter at all. It's still wonderful, it tastes great. And I do plan on trying to ferment some of these. The pole beans are getting really tall. They're starting to climb up the trellis well. See, this one's way up here. I don't think I've noticed any flowers yet. But those should be coming soon. One thing I do like to do when I'm in the garden, putzing around or whatever, is I like to come in and remove any of these yellowing or rusted, bug-eaten, see there's a slug on this one. I want to remove these leaves because any kind of breakdown or disease really is, it attracts the pests. And that's the last thing I want to do. Now I can't go crazy if I have basically bug damage on every leaf. I can't remove those, but leaves like this, they're not benefiting the plant at all. And so by removing them, the plant isn't going to try to repair this or put really any energy into this. And it can put energy where it's going to be more beneficial, like up to these healthier leaves. I don't know when my bee balm is going to flower, but I'm waiting for it. We really didn't get to harvest much spinach before it went ahead and went to seed. You can see that the plant put up a shoot up the middle, and we are going to get some flowers in here and some seed off of this. I haven't been able to grow spinach well at all here, at least not for very long. I really hope that I can grow spinach well over the winter in the greenhouse, so I'm going to try that. This time of year, when we're going from spring into the summer months, I'll come through the garden periodically to my cool loving plants and give them a taste, a lot like I did with that cauliflower, because once they really start to get too much heat, things start to get bitter. This dinosaur kale is still really good, so I'm going to do a small harvest of that this morning too. I want to go ahead and get a lot of this kale picked and preserved before it starts to get bitter. I can't grow the kale over the summer, but I still like to put kale in things like soups and casseroles over summer. I'll chop it, and I will just put it right in the freezer without blanching it first. And because of the way I use the kale, freezing it without blanching it, it really doesn't affect its texture or usability in casseroles or soups at all. I'm running out of room in my basket, so I'm gonna have to come back later. Good problem. Here's the status of some of the watermelons in the kids' garden. They're looking good. Looks like their tomatoes are gonna need to be trellised real soon. In the raised bed garden and in the kids' garden, we actually use cattle panel trellises for our tomatoes. These types of trellises work very, very well. They're super sturdy, but in the greenhouse, I actually have a different type of trellising system for my tomatoes. So let's go check that out. Oh, before we do that though, I want to show you, I have a volunteer squash of sorts. These are actually strawberries over here. And I guess when I planted the strawberries, I dug up some kind of squash. This may be a butternut, but I can't tell yet. We do not have an amazing history of squash doing well here. The squash bugs, but especially the squash vine borers, have really not been good to us. I have a plan of how to get squash later on in the year. So until then, we'll see how that one does. You're a good boy, buddy. You are. So I actually left the greenhouse sidewalls open last night. During that decently heavy weather, there was quite a lot of wind, quite a lot of rain. I know that the greenhouse can handle that, but I wanted to see how the plants would fare. And now that I have the tomatoes staked, I was comfortable doing that. So let's check them out. So these are the Heatmaster hybrid tomato. Look at the flowers. And most of them have one or two fruits on as well, which is really awesome. So we have just these fiberglass poles keeping up the tomatoes in here, and that's not the end goal for the trellising system for these tomatoes. What I plan to do is basically a version of the Florida weave. Now, some of you may be familiar with the Florida weave method of trellising, some of you may not be, but basically with that, you don't exactly put a stake at each tomato, but you'll put a stake between each tomato and go ahead and weave tomato twine between the stakes and the tomatoes, and it basically forces the tomatoes to stay upright. Here in the greenhouse, that would mean that I would have a hole punched in this woven weed fabric every foot. And I do have that when I've got plants growing, like my peppers are planted every foot, but I really didn't want to put another hole or several, probably 30 more holes in this woven ground cover. So what I decided to do was put a stake at each tomato plant. And I will be going ahead and putting a T-post at the end of each tomato row to anchor my tomato twine, and then I can weave through that way. I'm not doing that today, but that's something I will show you when I go ahead and get to that point. But basically the twine, as it goes through, is going to support these other leaders or these other suckers that inevitably have to happen or have to be left on determinate plants like this. So this is a good example here. This tomato plant has several different leaders coming off of it. There's one here, there's one here, there's going to be several more. You see this? This is actually a sucker, and these things you normally will remove off of an indeterminate tomato plant. But on a determinate tomato, removal of these suckers really will remove your fruit production from the plant. Determinate tomatoes really only make a determined amount of fruit per plant. And if you remove the fruiting parts of those plants, you're not going to be getting that fruit. It's not going to acclimate and allocate those resources that were removed to another area of the plant. They'll just stop putting on fruit. And this type of trellising that we're going to be implementing for them is going to help keep them supported, because again, if they're too heavy with fruit or if the wind comes through, it can snap off those branches, and that's it for the fruit on that part of the plant. And it's not going to grow new parts to make up for it like an indeterminate variety will. These 3 tomatoes here are actually indeterminates. I think these might be Mr. Stripey tomatoes. You can see them coming on here. And a Mr. Stripey tomato is an indeterminate variety, meaning that as long as you give the plant support, it's going to be putting on fruit for the whole season. Determinates will put their fruit on all at once, so we're going to have quite the canning and harvesting day when all of these tomatoes here ripen. But the indeterminate plants, they'll just keep fruiting as long as I let them, and they really need to be reined in as far as their suckers and things go, because it's really not necessary for them to be bogged down with those different suckers when they can really grow upwards and have a lot more airflow and extend the life of the plant. So here is this indeterminate plant with some pretty big suckers. So here we have the main stem of this plant. Here is basically a sun leaf for the plant, and this here is a sucker. I'm just going to take my fingernail and pinch this sucker right off. And instead of the tomato putting energy into these outward side shoots, it's actually going to place that energy in these fruits here that will be coming on and the vertical growth. And we'll get a healthier plant that has a lot more airflow, and it can actually live the entire season and fruit the entire season. Now, if I or anyone else had a need for more tomato plants, you can actually root these suckers in water, and this will be a whole nother tomato plant all in itself. The green peppers are filling out really nicely. Look how lush they are. And see, we're getting some buds coming on. And I realized that I was talking last week really about this plant without explaining much about why it looks the way that it does. These 2 plants here are actually a variegated or striped type of pepper, and the whole plant has this really cool leaf coloration on it. Isn't that gorgeous? I know that many different types of plants have variegation, and it's super beautiful, and it's something that we can actually see with the shade cloth on in the greenhouse. Variegation tends to fade or not show up as much when the plant is exposed to full sun. But in the shade, we get to really see how beautiful variegation can be. And here's the jalapenos. I am experiencing a little bit of flea beetle damage in here, so I'm going to have to come through with some diatomaceous earth so that this doesn't get worse. See, this particular plant, this one has it real bad. I don't ever actually see the beetle. Maybe, is that an aphid? Oh, and a slug. Oh, that's great. See, we've got a slug here as well. Maybe that's the issue I'm dealing with. Look, I pulled 3 slugs off of that plant. Oh man. So once these plants dry out, I will be putting DE on them, but maybe I need to go ahead and put a dish of beer in here too to attract the slugs. That is an old trick from my grandma. She used to put dishes of beer in her garden to catch the slugs, and it works. The number of flowers on these tomatoes, you guys. Oh, I'm so excited for preserving these. Hello, sir. Yeah, we hear you. We hear you. I know I need to feed you. So Hamish, he doesn't like to show them off, but he has some pretty bad horn scurs on the top. It's where his disbudding wasn't exactly complete. It's really hard to disbud bucks. And he has some scurs that I need to take care of, huh, buddy? Are you hungry? Yeah, I'll feed you. So we're getting a whole bunch of rain this week. The rain has really great soluble nitrogens in it. So I expect the garden tour next week is going to show a really huge boost for all of the plants. So I've gone ahead and made a Tour Tuesday playlist. So this is the third Tour Tuesday that I've posted. If you've missed some of the others, go ahead and click this link. It's gonna take you to the playlist and you can catch up. Try that again.